So what I wanted to review is looking at adding functionality to Quadra so that utilities could create, maintain, sustain multi-year capital programs, capital plans. Now, the idea is that you leverage Quadra by creating your budgets in Quadra, and then once the budgets are created, you would then have the ability to do some reviews and some analysis and determine which projects you want to put into which particular capital budgeting year. So in order to facilitate that, we've been playing around with some options at Earth Power, and I'd like to see if there's interest in getting a group together to review the functionality and see if we can come up with something that would be more baked into the solution and actually work as a true budgeting maintenance tool for capital planning. So let me just look at a high level here. And so what we did is we used one field called the job type field, and that's how we identify jobs that are going to fit within a particular capital budget year. So in this case, we've got 2020, 2021, 22, etc. I understand some utilities have used this field for tracking their OEB job types. So that's why we may want to look at modifying the functionality for something that, as I said, is more permanent. So in this case, I got this report, and I'm just going to select 2020. I'm selecting various projects that these jobs are assigned to. So we assign each budget to a particular project, and these are the projects that we're going to be working on. And then I also need to select my budget year so that I can pull through transactions from prior years that are going to be hitting the budget this year that we're kind of not planned for. And I'll explain that a little bit later. So when I run this report, it pulls up by project. So in this case, it's C&I connections, fleet replacement, planned CapEx, pole replacement, poles, wires, transformers, residential connections, subdivision. So these are all the projects, and this is not a comprehensive list, but this is just for example purposes. And then what I can see is as I dive into like one, let's say, which is residential connections, what I can see here is this is the budget column, estimated actuals, percent of budget, percent complete. So I can see in residential connections, I had budgeted $350,000 for the year. I've estimated currently $7,000, and I've got actuals in there of $190,000. So something's a little wonky here. I'm not sure what that is. If we have just got some bad data. But what you can see is when I look at this particular I'll look at one particular job here. Look at this one. And so what I've done with each one of these is it now breaks it down by those typical cost categories. So I've got labor, non-stock, inventory, equipment, and then I've got CC as the contributed capital. And I can see that I've got $1,300 of contributed capital. And I can see that I've got, equipment time, I estimated $130. And I've actually looks like I've got $57. So this is just some typical estimate to actual comparison numbers for you. But I can also just dive in and see that, break it right down to the cost code level to see where are my numbers estimated compared to actuals and why are they off so much. So it's giving, that detail, that comparison, like driving right from a budget all the way into an estimate. If I look at some other examples here, let's look under here. And we'll look at this one here. So again, you can see I budgeted $299,000 for the year. And you can see that these are all of the estimates that are rolling up into that. So right now for pole replacements, budgeted 300,000. I've estimated this much so far. My actuals are much higher. So again, there's obviously some projects that haven't been estimated, or that I've got my data isn't fantastic. But so if I look at that particular project again, I can see some really good detail. And as I dive into, looking at my material, I can see any variance from my estimate to my actual. Maybe this particular job is not complete. I'm not sure what the status of this particular job is, but you can just see the details again, getting your budget number and then tracking your estimates through to your actuals. So we'll look at one last one here. So this is a good example because this is actually showing us all of the detail of budget right through to our estimates to our actuals. And the reason that we were able to get this detail is because if I go into this particular job, what I can see, the way that these have been budgeted for is I've got an event that's called budget, and that's how we identify the budget dollars, is based on this event action. So if I drill into that, I'm going to see that they've estimated this particular job to be whatever, $359,000 with a cost of $325,000. And the way they do that is they've created some budget assemblies. So I think we might have 30 or 40 different budget assemblies that have been created. So these are the descriptions of the budget assemblies that were used. So they're doing sort of a rough estimate, so that you get a pretty good approximation of what the costs are going to be. So once I've done my budget, I use that number for capital planning purposes. So I'm going to have a cost. The bid is $359. But as I start building out the estimate now, so if I look at these particular estimates, I can see that this is my bid summary here for that particular estimate. But I can look at the assemblies, and now what you'll see are your typical assemblies that you'd expect to see, on a particular design. So that's the idea, is that we create a budget. We use the event action to identify the dollars for the budget, and then within the same work order, we then can do our estimates, and then as the actuals come in, they'll actually accrue to this as well. So that's how, when you look at that particular job, you can see the budget to the estimate to the actuals, and then I can get some great detail in here about variances to budget, variances to estimate, etc. And then I can dive in even further and sort of break this sucker down and see, where's the difference in terms of, what I had estimated versus, my actual quantities or my estimated dollars. So it's given us great detail at your fingertips so that you can kind of keep track of the budgets to estimates to actuals. So that's the reporting side of it with a little bit of detail. And you can see on some of these projects, in this case for pole replacement, how they budgeted or how they came up with that budget number is they just created a single job request and then put an estimated number of, against a lump sum against that particular job, so that I can sort of see like how many poles am I anticipating. In this case, what am I anticipating is going to be required for doing those particular jobs. So it's a really a high level number. You know, I'm not even seeing assemblies on there, right? It's just a high level number. So that's a couple of different ways, and what we're trying to get at there is just I need to come up with a budget number, right? So that's what that is, and it's going to budget your labor, other effort associated with that. So one of the nice things about this approach as well is I can now, if I'm looking at, you know, assessing like what should I be doing for, you know, 2020, you know, maybe you're doing some considerations for, you know, looking at, you just want to look at how many labor hours do I have currently planned in my 2020 budget. So I can just select labor and review, and here are all the jobs that are in that category of 2020 capital so far, and I can see each one. It's giving me a summary of the, you know, lineman hours, design tech hours, etc. And then when I go to the end, when I go to the last page here, what I'm going to get is this nice summary of how many hours I currently have. So I currently have 18,713 hours of lineman time allocated for this particular budget year. And if I only have, let's say, 15,000 available, I know that I need to either bring in some third-party contractors, or maybe I need to push some of these 2020 capital jobs into 2021, etc. Another nice thing about this is it can be helpful for doing some, you know, some planning, depending on, you know, whether it's poles and transformers. You know, giving you an idea of quantities of items that you're planning on or expecting to have for a given year. So I can see. Let me just look up poles here. So I can see here my poles. So this is the quantity of poles that I'm anticipating requiring within this particular budget year. So again, I could do the same thing for transformers. It's not going to necessarily be exact, but it's going to give you a pretty good idea of what you're anticipating. So this is not perfect, but at least it allowed us to put jobs into a given year with some approximate quantities of hours and material, and then be able to do an assessment, figure out what goes into or what should we be budgeting for a given capital year. And then the other report gives us that ability to actually track on an ongoing basis the status of these projects throughout the budget year. So where I think we can make improvements in this is, you know, within Quadra itself is possibly adding some fields that we can use for grouping requests, projects into, you know, given budget years, so we don't have to use, you know, the job type field, and maybe enhancing some of the reporting, and coming up with perhaps even sharing things like our budget assembly. So if I look at our assemblies, you know, there's a bunch in here that are a category of budget. So these are the ones that have been set up as budget. There's no reason why we couldn't likely share, you know, some of these assemblies so that, you know, we have some point of commonality about the budgeting process. Your actuals are going to be different. Your estimates might be different. You might have different configurations for your assemblies, whether you're a USF member or not. But I still think from a budgeting perspective, we could certainly share some value here. So that's kind of a quick video. Like I said, I'd like to see if we can get a group of people together, whether you're from finance and ops, just to sort of sit down and brainstorm a little bit further about how we might be able to do this in a you know, a streamlined, effective way, and what tools do we need to have or should we be looking at for managing these budgets. There's a bunch of things that, you know, you could also be incorporating into your assessments. You know, for example, you know, we could add things like, you know, some risk factoring, right? So, you know, let's not just look at jobs. Let's as we're building them out, let's bring in some risk factoring to say that, you know, this is the risk if we don't do this, and maybe it's public safety, maybe it's worker safety, maybe there's some financial risk of not doing something, maybe there's outages. There's a bunch of different factors that could weigh into the consideration, in addition to looking at the material, labor costs, etc. So so we're going to be setting up a webinar to review this and see if there's any interest from the utilities to participate. Obviously, no cost to participate in the review, and just to see if we can come up with some commonality with an approach. Thanks for listening.